So let's see, starting from the beginning. I actually woke up really early that morning. So I woke up about 6:30. Usually wake up at 7:30. Woke up at 6:30. Took the dog out. And I remember just thinking it was an absolutely gorgeous day. And I remember thinking it was really the first, I guess it was September, so it was really the first nice day of the fall, you know, first nice fall day. Because it was chilly out, but it was beautiful, really clear. And so I came home, and I think I went back to bed after that. And I had just moved down to 20th Street, and so I had sort of gotten into a routine of not watching as much television in the morning. So I went and I took a shower and turned on the radio, and they were talking to some musician about some CD or something that the person had just put out. And all of a sudden somebody said something about a plane, but it wasn't very clear, and I thought that they were...
Hello? I'm sorry, you have the wrong number. Stacy.
Oh wait, that's my other name.
Oh.
So anyway, so it wasn't really clear what was going on. I thought they were, because I had just come out of the shower and I kind of caught it in mid-conversation, so I thought that I was hearing something that had happened in the past. And just they were talking about a plane crashing into a building. But then it became very clear that they didn't know what was going on and they were trying to get details, so I thought, well, this just happened. So I flipped on the television, and the first thing I saw was a picture of the World Trade Center with a big hole in it. And they were saying, you know, this plane had crashed. And I knew that I could see the Trade Center from my roof. So the first thing I did was just put my mouth over my hands, or put my hands over my mouth. I was, you know, shocked. At that point I thought it was an accident. And so I ran upstairs and up onto the roof, and there were already a couple of people there, just about, I think there were just 2 people there. And I just looked out, and there was the hole I had just seen on television. And I said, you know, because it was facing in my direction, and all the smoke was going off towards Brooklyn. And I just was in shock, you know, just took my breath away. So I just said, you know, I can't believe this. And nobody had any other details that I didn't already have. One person had a camera, so I thought, you know, as morbid as this is, I know that there's something going on here that, you know, is pretty incredible, whatever it is. And so I said, I know this is morbid, but I'm going to go get my camera. And this other woman said, yes, it is morbid. And I felt very bad, but at the same time, in my mind, I was thinking that nobody was in the building. Because the way that my lifestyle was, I didn't go to work until 9:30, 10 o'clock, you know, and I'm not thinking financial district. They've been at work since 6:30, you know. So I just didn't really think that there was anybody in the building. I wouldn't let myself think that, I guess, in hindsight. So I ran downstairs, and I got my camera, and I came back upstairs, and I took a few pictures. And, I mean, I was just standing there, you know. At this point, there were more people up on the roof. And so I realized I had left my dog. You know, I had only had the dog for a month, and he was still in a new environment, so he was downstairs barking and kind of going nuts. So I went downstairs to get him, and this is where it gets a little fuzzy, because at one point I was going to go to work, because I thought, well, there's nothing really that I can do, and I don't, you know, I guess that's kind of it. And so I actually had my backpack on, and I had my jacket on, and I was ready to leave for work. Mm-hmm. And I think that's when the second plane hit. And I still had the TV on because I was just waiting for updates, and I was just about to turn it off because I was standing across the room, just standing there. And the second plane hit. But you couldn't tell what happened. On TV it just looked like there was another explosion from the first plane. So I dropped my bag and everything, I think, and I ran back upstairs to the roof. And I said, what happened? What happened? And everybody on the roof told me that it was the second plane that had come in. And I said, you know, did it get lost in the smoke? And they said, no, it came from the other direction, where it was perfectly crystal clear in the other direction. So at that point I knew that there was some sort of terrorist thing going on. And I'm assuming that they must have said that on television, that that's what they were surmising, because I don't know if I came up with that. I'm assuming that they said that on TV. So at that point I knew this was bigger, you know. And where my building was situated is just about 15 blocks from the Empire State Building. which is on the other side. So we kept looking at the Trade Center and looking at the Empire State Building and going back and forth between one and the other, waiting for something to happen to the Empire State Building. And my thoughts was that they were going to get all of the emergency, people and vehicles downtown, and then they were going to hit something uptown. So, and at that point, they hadn't shut off the airspace, but there was no military planes or anything. And somebody on the roof kept saying, where's the military? Where's the military? And that was voting day, actually, as well.
Wow.
And so we were all just kind of standing there again. I took some more pictures. Somebody else had brought their dog up to the roof, so I went downstairs to get my dog. And when I went downstairs to get my dog, I had left the TV on. Every time I ran out, the TV was on. Actually, I think it was when the second plane hit, I went downstairs. My mother had called, but she didn't say, "Are you okay?" or anything. She just said, "Oh, I'm just calling to say hello. Want to see how you're doing." So I'm thinking she hasn't heard, and I'll just call her when I get to work or whatever. And but apparently she had heard, and she was calling to find out if I was okay. But she didn't want to scare me. She didn't know if I knew what was going on. So when I came down the next time to get the dog was when the first building collapsed. So I saw that on television. And I was just watching somebody be interviewed, and I watched it like the rest of the country just, fell on television. So I, of course, grabbed the dog and ran back upstairs again. And at that point, people were starting to realize, that this is just unbelievable. But even then, there was really only one guy on that roof who it really hit him, and everybody else was just sort of standing around, not really knowing what to do or to say. Lots of people were taking pictures. But this one guy was standing in the corner, and he, you could tell he was on his way out to work and heard about it and came upstairs. And he just was sobbing, like convulsing sobbing and not breathing and standing up against the wall furthest away. And I was really kind of afraid he was going to fall over a little bit. He just seemed so unsteady. So I went over. Somebody else had given him water, and I went over, and another woman came over, and we were sort of comforting him and just kind of, rubbing his back and not even really talking to him other than sort of to remind him to breathe. And and people kept coming up to us and saying, does he know people down there? And I said, I don't know him, and it was just kind of interesting to see the different ways that people handled it. Another woman came along who's a bit older, you could tell sort of lifelong New Yorker, and she said, now there's nothing you can do about it. Pull yourself together. And I looked at her and I looked at him and I said, you let it out. I was so mad at her. But, everybody handles things differently. So,
what was going through your mind at the time?
I honestly believed that everybody had gotten out. I don't know, and again, in hindsight, seeing all the pictures and that everybody else has taken, and I mean, logically I know that that's impossible, but I couldn't believe it, that there would still be people in there. So,
were there a lot of did you hear a lot of fire trucks? Was there a lot of noise and commotion, or was it kind of a surreal calm? Or
yeah, I don't remember the sirens until after. There were sirens and emergency vehicles all going downtown, and because I remember thinking that they were going to all go downtown and then something was going to happen uptown. Mm-hmm. So I know that they were going downtown, but that's not really what I was thinking. Mostly I was thinking there was a building that was being built right across the street from my building, and there were men up on up working and building this building, and they were all sitting there watching, on this sort of undone building, in construction. And then people behind us were on their roof watching, so you could see all the other people watching the same thing that you were watching. And they were doing the same thing, all just kind of talking to one another and kind of milling around, but there was sort of nothing to be said about what was happening. And at one point I needed to sort of get away from, this guy had kind of calmed down, and I needed to sort of have a minute away from that. And so I went over and I was talking to the other woman who had her dog, and she and I started talking about the dogs, and I actually took a few pictures of the dogs playing together, and it was just kind of a nice diversion. And ultimately we started talking about where she had her dog trained and things like that. And I mean, partly I'm thinking, I can't believe that this is what I'm talking about, but partly, you know, there was nothing really else that we could say, you know. I mean, we didn't know really what was going on, and and that's when the second building started to collapse. And so I wasn't facing the buildings at the time. I was sort of to the side of them, and she and I were speaking this way, and the buildings were over here, and the guy was behind me, and he had at that point had stood back up and was leaning against the wall again, and he just crumbled, and just this like look of anguish on his face, and that's how I knew. And so I saw his face, and I turned around and I saw the building coming down, and I had my camera, and I thought about taking a picture, and because it kind of happened in slow motion, you know, like the top part came down first, and you could tell it was all falling straight down, you know, it wasn't going to the side, and I couldn't take the picture, and it wasn't because of what I thought, you know, the people that I thought were in that, but it was because of this guy, you know. I just thought, what would he think of me, you know, if I took this picture right now? So I didn't take that picture, and immediately went over to him, and this other woman came over too, and we again were comforting him, and at this point, you know, you couldn't call anybody. I was trying to call my parents, and I couldn't get through. At one point, I finally did go down to my apartment, and I called my father, and I did get through. And he was very thankful of that, because he'd been trying to get through as well. And so he called the rest of my brothers and sisters and let them know that I was okay, because they knew that I had moved downtown. My dad knows the city very well, but the rest of my brothers and sisters don't. And so they weren't exactly sure where I lived relative to, you know, the World Trade Center or anything. So that's what happened then. And then, so we're sitting there, and after it happened, we're still sitting there on the roof. I think we're still waiting for something to happen, and eventually the military, you know, eventually they did close off all the airspace, and the military started flying over, and
could you actually feel, I mean, no, it was 15 blocks away, but I mean, could you feel?
It's a lot more than 15, actually.
Oh, 15.
Yeah, I'm on 20th Street, but you go from 20th pretty much to like 11th Street on the west side, and then it starts turning into the named streets, and then you go through Greenwich Village, and then from Greenwich Village you go through Tribeca, and then from Tribeca you go through Wall Street. So I'm actually probably like a fifth of the island away from where it was happening.
So you really didn't hear or feel any sensation from it coming down?
No. Not that I remember. I tried to remember if I could hear anything, because I spoke with people who were closer, who when they were telling me the stories that they had gone through, it hit me, you know. I said, well, the tremendous sound you must have heard, and they said it was unbelievable. And I don't remember hearing anything. To me, the whole thing happened kind of in silence, so. And
I guess it couldn't matter where the wind was blowing, you know. I mean, if you were
right.
downwind, it might be horrendous, and if you were upwind, you wouldn't hear it.
Right, right. And we got very lucky. I mean, the smoke from it was unbelievable, and it was all going out to Brooklyn. So we got very lucky with that. Yeah. Because later the smoke did start blowing up, and it just, you know, this was like a month later, and the smell was just unbelievable.
Now, I had heard them talk about the smell a lot. Was the initial smell, was there an initial smell that very day, or that? Sure,
but it didn't hit me. It didn't come up to where I was. When I spoke with another friend of mine who lives over on the east side near 14th Street, she was getting it the whole time, and she said it was horrible. She actually heard the first plane come over.
And the smell, I mean, can you describe it? Is it something that you ever smelled before?
No, I mean, it smelled just like like the worst electrical fire you can imagine. I mean, it just was very acrid smelling, very metallic, and like you just couldn't imagine what you were breathing in, but you knew you were breathing something in, you know. The smell actually, the wind had shifted maybe a few days after, and it came into my apartment, and they were saying on the TV that, you know, if you could smell it or whatever, to close your windows, and so I was closing my windows and everything, and you know, if you've ever lived in a New York City apartment, they're all very hot, so so it wasn't very nice to have to close all the windows, but you know, it was between one or the other, and so you close the windows. My parents were calling, you know, are you closing the windows? Are you closing the windows? And you could still smell it through the windows, you know. And then there was another point, probably, well, it must have been within the first couple of days, because it was still at the point where nobody was going to work. And I went to meet up with some friends who were going out to eat, because at that point, again, nobody was going to work. You couldn't go below 14th Street. You didn't really want to go anywhere. You know, you couldn't do too much because they had so many volunteers, you know, they just were turning people away at that point. So I told these friends of mine that I would meet them out, and they had just finished eating, and but I met them in the restaurant, and so I walked in, and we must have walked out 10 minutes later, and I thought another building had gone down, because Union Square at 14th Street was just filled with smoke. And again, it was a gorgeous day, so I didn't know where it was coming from. And, you know, again, in hindsight, the wind had shifted, and that was what was going on. But it was, and it just felt like, there was one time when I was young and I slept too close to a campfire, and I woke up with, like, just feeling really nauseous and horrible, because I guess, inhaled too much smoke in the night. And that's what it smelled like, was just, it made you nauseous, you know, it's just, and that was just kind of smoke, you know, like smoldering smoke. And so I immediately went home to turn on the TV, because I wanted to see what was going on. Mm-hmm. And they weren't saying anything new, and so, and I was walking by Fifth Avenue, and I looked down Fifth Avenue. I guess this is when I came out later. I looked down Fifth Avenue, and it looked to me like a building that was half down. And I thought, oh my God, that building right there. And I was thinking, can I see the World Trade Center? I didn't think I could see it from here. It seems pretty close. And so I was really confused, because again, it was all through the smoke and haze that this was going on. Well, it turns out that it was just a building that was in the process of being built. And so it was kind of, you could still see the metal coming out from it, and it was just in the smoke and the haze. You can really tell how far away it was. And so that was kind of a scary day, just because I didn't know what was going on. And because nothing was going on, nobody was saying anything on television, so...
I imagine there was, you know, I mean, after witnessing something like that, that your self-assurance of the world around you, you know, was no longer very solid. I mean, you know, that it must have really... I mean, it impacted us from quite a distance, you know. I mean, mm-hmm. With that, I would look around when the plane would come over, you know, and, you know, well, it's just a crop duster, but still, you know.
Right. Yeah, it was definitely the first time I ever really felt like I was on an island, because they shut everything down, you know, and you couldn't get out, you couldn't get in, and you just felt like, I'm not safe here, and yet I'm not allowed to leave. Mm-hmm. Right after it happened, again, like, you know, I didn't want to sit home alone, and I didn't know what to do. So I was hanging out with some other people from the building who would invite me over just to come watch TV and stuff, and we were hanging out, but after a while I just kind of felt like they just keep saying the same thing. I can't really watch this anymore, and I need to do something. So I was in the elevator, and somebody suggested that she was going to go give blood, and I thought, that's perfect. That's something that I can do, you know. So I went right out, and I started going down to 12th Street to St. Vincent's, a hospital down there. And I'm walking down, and I'm on 7th Avenue, and there was a police car going down, and they were just, you know, they had a bullhorn, and they were just saying, you know, please do not continue going downtown. Your life is at risk. You're in danger. Do not go downtown. Do not go downtown. Everything is shut off, you know, below 14th Street. Please turn around, turn around. Which, of course, you know, being New Yorkers, nobody obeyed. Everybody continued. And you know, but that was odd because I'm thinking, what do they know that I don't, you know, and at that point I could go below 14th Street at least to get to St. Vincent's, but I went to one entrance and there were just people crowded around already sort of trying to find people, and I certainly didn't want to take up anybody's time there, so I went around and found the line for giving blood, and I know that I'm O, but couldn't remember if I was O negative or O positive, and unless you knew absolutely for sure, you know, what you were, it was pretty much a waste of everybody's time. So they just said, you know, we have everybody we need. So these a few people came along on bikes because all the transit was shut down. So a few people came along on bikes and said that they were going up. They needed blood at, I think it was 64th Street. So I was going to head up there, but I knew that there were some people at work who lived in Staten Island and Brooklyn, and figured that they would probably be stranded, and you know, and they're friends of mine. So I thought, you know, I live so close to work, you know, invite them to come over if they need a place to stay. Mm-hmm. And so I tried to call and I couldn't get through. Finally, I actually did get through and spoke with one person, and she said that they had gotten to work. She thought that she was actually the last subway that ran under the World Trade Center, because she goes under that stop, and then I guess everything got shut off after that. I don't know if she had to come up early and walk to work. I can't remember. But all the people who could pretty much left, and so they were still there. And at that point, they hadn't seen anything on television. They had only heard what was going on the radio. And so I told them I was going to give blood, and this woman said that she wanted to as well. So I said, well, I'll come get you, and we'll walk up there together. So I walked over to my office, which is over by Chelsea Piers, which they had turned into kind of a makeshift hospital area or a triage center or something. Mm-hmm. And I got to my building, and they had already blocked off the street. And to this day, I'm not entirely sure why. I don't know if it's because it's right next to the water. I don't know if it's because it's a few blocks away from the helipad, or if it was because they do have FBI files in this one building, and so I don't know if there was actually FBI agents in there at the time. But for whatever reason, they blocked it off. And so I came upon these two officers, and I said, I think at least one was an FBI lady, because she escorted me in, and I told her what I was doing there and told her I worked there. And so she escorted me in just to the front desk and said, you know, does this place of business, is that here? And they said yes. And she said, okay, you can go on up. So I went up, and everybody was like, what's going on out there? I'm like, you just wouldn't believe it. I mean, you know, this had to be maybe like 11:30, so this was 2 hours later, and there's already FBI people stationed everywhere. By the time we ended up walking up to 64th Street, I mean, just FBI, police everywhere, you know, and places blocked off, blocks blocked off where the post office, major post offices were. And
now this was the day of.
This was the day of, yeah. And
was it ever in your mind to not go into work, or?
I only went over to pick them up.
Oh, I see.
I mean, yeah. Once the second plane hit, I had no intentions of actually going to work. And when I got there, and I spoke with the people who were there, and they were telling me, you know, most of the people had actually gotten to work and had subsequently left to go find their loved ones, basically, because nobody could get through on the telephone. So one girl, her boyfriend, who she lives with, was on site at a job. He's an interior designer, and she didn't know where the site was, you know, so she wanted to find him. And the man who owned the company, his ex-wife and 2 kids, he just didn't know where they were. And so I know that he ran out and rented a bicycle and ended up riding his bike to Brooklyn, and they were fine, you know, and whatever. But everybody just kind of split to go out and find out what was going on. But so interestingly enough, the 2 people that I walked up to give blood with, one is Russian and one is Israeli. So we had some very interesting conversations on the way up. The woman who's Israeli, you know, she's been here for a year and she's staying for another year, and you know, she was saying, you'd think that, you know, I might be used to this kind of thing. She said, but it's never on a scale like this. You know, she said, you know, it might be, you know, a few people or 20 people, but nothing like this. And so we walked up to give blood, and again, I think we were told to go up to the Red Cross. So we walked up to the Red Cross, where we basically put our names on the list, and they said, we'll call you if we need you, but we've got so many people. So after walking 60 blocks, they decided that they really wanted to try and get home. So, and they did. I think at that point, I guess they must have opened up a few lines out. So they went home, and I walked home. And I guess I just watched TV all night. I mean, you know, there was nothing really much more you could do. And the next day, I tried to go give blood again, and I walked 60 blocks again, and I was told the same thing. So, so at least walking, you know, I was doing something. But it felt very weird to walk around, you know, it was quiet and just strange, you know, it just wasn't.
Not New York anymore.
It was not New York, yeah. There was I remember seeing one guy who was just wasted. I don't know if he was, you know, on crack or what, but, you know, obviously somebody who had given up on life a while ago, and just thinking, I just wanted to, you know, and I saw, there, you know, because nobody was at work, you know, people were going into the bars and things like that, and I just was thinking, I need to stay cognizant, you know, I need to stay on my toes, because I really didn't know if at any moment something else was going to go down. And I just kept trying to think, like, well, my parents lived in Connecticut, and I kept thinking, should I leave and go see my parents as soon as I can? And then part of me had a little bit of guilt, like I should stay, you know, like I should stay and go through what everybody else is going through. So there was definitely a feeling of, you know, especially having spent all that, you know, that situation on the roof with all these people in my building. I mean, that's like the only way I actually got to know the people in my building, you know, because I had just moved there. And so there was definitely a feeling of some sort of, I don't want to say camaraderie, I don't know if that's the right word, but of people having seen what you saw, you know, and feeling the same way that you did, kind of trapped, you know. And
so in your mind, I mean, can you remember what was, I mean, I'm sure the shock was, you know, in different levels at different times. I mean, you kind of don't know, it's hard, like, to recall what you were thinking at a time of like an automobile accident, you know. I mean, it's like, it just, you kind of go into a fog or something. I guess one of the images too that kept showing up on the TV was this white ash over everything. I mean, it just had such an eerie, I mean, beyond what the apocalyptic filmmaker type scenarios could ever imagine, it seemed.
right.
It just had such a ghostly effect. I mean, did this area draw you in it? I mean, did you have any feel any need to go see, you know, Ground Zero?
Yeah, I
close?
did go down. I didn't go down until probably a month or so later. Again, everything was really shut down for quite a while. That particular day, as I was walking around the city, I saw people walking around with white ash in their hair and white ash on their clothes, and you know, makeshift scarves over their faces. They had obviously been down there and had made it uptown. And I saw one guy who was covered in white ash, and it was like hours later, but it almost seemed like he was wearing it as some sort of badge, you know, like I was there, you know, kind of a thing, which I thought was kind of interesting. I don't really know what to make of it, but
could he have still been in shock to some degree, you think, or was he just kind of boisterous or?
No, he wasn't boisterous by any means. I mean, sure, he could have been in shock. I don't know I couldn't tell you what was going through his mind. Yeah, so as we were saying, my sister and brother-in-law came to visit Labor Day weekend, so that was probably a week or a week and a half before the 11th, and we had gone on the ferry ride out to Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island, and I was taking pictures of people, and I used to take lots of pictures of sort of landscapes and stuff, and in time have found that with just a regular 35mm camera, it usually just doesn't come out the way you want it to. You might as well just take pictures of people and, you know, the things that are going on. So I was taking pictures of the people, and, you know, I kind of pointed the camera towards the landscape of New York, and I was like, oh, I'm not going to take a picture of that. I've seen that a million times. And then I did snap a few shots because I said, well, I haven't seen it from this perspective in a really long time, and I did snap a few shots, and of course the film was actually being developed on September 11th, so, you know, it took like a couple days, and so I said, well, I guess I should go pick up that film because those are some of the last pictures ever taken of the Trade Center. And I actually have a picture that was taken, you know, I don't know what floor it is, but it's only of the top. The top's up, and I'm not really sure why I took that picture, but took that picture, and then I have a picture of the Statue of Liberty with the Trade Center behind it. So, and now, of course, I'm glad I have those pictures. You know. So I don't know. The day that it happened was so surreal, you know, and I think that, especially, you know, and of course, what happened at the Pentagon, and my brother and his family live in Virginia, just outside of D.C., and, you know, they dealt with some similar things, you know, and in terms of, you know, fear and just sort of not knowing what was happening next, and especially Washington, you know, would be a continued target, you know, I think, and so, you know, I know that we weren't the only ones who dealt with that. I think what really hit me was what happened in the days following, you know, and that's when I heard all the sirens, you know, and they were constant, and it was every day, all day, and living on 7th Avenue, you know, that just went downtown all the time, and it went down 7th Avenue, and we had a fire station just 2 blocks down and kitty corner over, and a police precinct on my street, and so my street was blocked off from September 11th on up until I moved out of the city, and they would let through traffic through, but I'm not really sure what the requirements were. There was always somebody, you know, car parked there, and they would have to back up and then drive up again. So it was interesting. You know, I walked by the precinct all the time, and, you know, all of a sudden you found a newfound respect, of course, for New York City police and everybody else. So we talked to them, and interestingly enough, a couple days, it must have been like a couple weeks before September 11th, I had just moved down to the neighborhood, and I got up really early on a Sunday morning, and I was walking the dog over, heading towards 5th Avenue, and I was walking by the firehouse on 18th Street, and there's a very cute fireman standing there, and he was, you know, oh, let me, you know, saying hi to the dog, and so I was trying to get the dog to go say hello to him, and so we started chatting, and this guy behind him said, well, you know, he's famous. And I said, oh, you know, were you just interviewed or something for the local paper? And he said, no, he was on that show Small Town X, or Murder in Small Town X, which was some new reality TV show that was on, and I had seen once. And I said, oh, no, you're kidding. And I remember it said that there was like a fireman from New York City, and I was like, oh, you're kidding, that was you, you know. And so we were chatting, and he was saying he was trying to get a dog for his aunt, and, you know, wanted a small dog, and I was telling him that I saw there were poodles, you know, down the street. So we chatted for probably like 15 minutes or something, and it turned out that he actually lost his life on September 11th, and so he's really the only person I knew, you know. I don't know if you'd even call that, but, you know, even just chatting with him for 15 minutes, you know, I mean, he was such a nice guy, you know, and trying to find a little dog for his aunt, you know, and just seemed like a really sweet guy. And
how long was that before the September 11th?
Well, it must have been like the end of August, so maybe like 2 or 3 weeks before. So.
Hmm. No.
So it just, you know, it was sort of, it hit so many people around the city, you know, and just walking around the city on a daily basis, even when things sort of did start getting back to quote unquote normal, you know, all the candles and the pictures outside of all the fire stations, you know, because there's fire stations on every 2 blocks, you know, which is nice. And it was nice to see that and everything. I mean, there really was such an outpouring of support from people, but still, I mean.
Yeah, it did seem to come across on the TV that there was I don't know, use that word that you used, a camaraderie that seemed to swell up after that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and particularly in New York City and close areas too. I mean, I think there was a camaraderie from all across America actually, but it seemed particularly unique to New York City.
Yeah, well, I mean, just out walking the dog and stuff, and you'd start talking to another dog owner, and then they'd say, you know, did you know anybody, or, you know, is everybody you know okay? And when we got back to work, I mean, the first thing I did was, I didn't know if my clients were all okay, you know, I didn't know anything like that. So I had one client who I had emailed. I think I came in the next day and nobody else came in, so I left, and I had emailed her, and she hadn't emailed back, and so I was waiting and waiting and waiting, and so finally she did email back. And, you know, always the first question you ask is, you know, is everyone you know okay, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. I know a lot of people who had close calls. Thank God they're okay. But you were asking me about going down to Ground Zero. I did go down to Ground Zero. I didn't for a long time because, again, I didn't want it to seem like a morbid thing, you know. But I was speaking with somebody who goes to law school down there, and she had, you know, her school had opened back up, and she had been down there, and she said that you just couldn't imagine the enormity of it. You know, as enormous as it looks on television, you couldn't imagine it. And I did kind of want to see what the scale was, because I figured I couldn't imagine it. And from my perspective, I thought, from what I saw on TV, I could imagine it, you know. The interesting thing about it was, because there was nothing there anymore, you could only see the magnitude of what had happened from the things that were around the World Trade Center, you know, because the World Trade Center wasn't there anymore. There was one part sticking up, you know, one steel part sticking up. But even that just looked so foreign to how I knew the World Trade Center to look, that you could just as easily convince yourself that that's not really where the World Trade Center was, you know, because it almost seemed like the opening wasn't large enough for those 2 massive buildings, you know. And I think part of that is I'm not that familiar with that area. I hadn't been down to the World Trade Center in a long time. When I was walking down, and it's, I mean, they really kind of shuttle you through in one direction. It seemed to me like a lot of the people were from out of town and, you know, were coming into the city to see it. Again, no judgments, because I was down there too, but I wasn't taking pictures. But walking down, there was, and I don't know the buildings well enough, but one of the buildings, which was half gone, I guess, was in such a state of destruction that hit home more than the absence of the World Trade Center, you know. I mean, I think just seeing the physical destruction that was done, I don't know.
So I mean, this may sound like a stupid question, but where did all the debris go? I know they couldn't have removed it that within the first months. Did it just fall?
They removed a lot of it.
They removed a lot?
Yeah, they removed a lot of it, actually. In the days following, you know, you just saw trucks going out with just hauling stuff out. I mean, it's an excellent question, actually. Like, you know, you saw the steel part still sticking up, you know, and it's the steel part that everybody has seen in the magazines. I don't know where the rest of the steel went to. I just don't know. I mean, I can't imagine they got it out that fast either, but it wasn't there. I mean, there definitely was debris there, but again, not. You just would think that you would see like a large mound of debris, and it just wasn't there by the time I got down there. So, I guess they did remove it. I think the thing that hit me the most is you were saying that something that hit you the most was the white dust. And actually, the first thing you see as you're heading down there is, well, the first thing you see are the people peddling all the American flag gear.
That was sick. I mean, the first thing, the next day, I think on TV, they were peddling, getting for $29.99, getting the flags for your car and the flag pin and this and that, and it's like, oh, for Christ's sake, Jeez.
Yeah.
Give us a break, at least for a week or something.
Right. It's like, when you get down to Wall Street, it's sort of, you've gone through Chinatown, so it's the bottom of Chinatown, and then you go to Wall Street. And so, there's a lot of people who make their livelihoods, peddling things on the street corner down there. And, all of a sudden, all their wares had the American flag on it, and we're selling things. And it's typical stuff on the street. It's the same thing every 2 feet, but they're all selling it, and people were buying, and postcards and stuff like that of the World Trade Center, and which actually I think some were sold out from what I remember. Maybe I overheard somebody saying that they were looking for postcards from the World Trade Center and they couldn't find them or something. They were all sold out. I don't know. Anyway, so, and then you get to a point where all the stores are closed and everything's just covered in white dust, inside and out. And that was odd, And I felt very, like I was violating something walking through that, because of what happened. But I think what I was going to say was the picture on TV that really hit me the most was, and they kept showing it, was, I don't know if you saw it, but right after, I don't know if it was the first building or the second building collapsed, it was the white dust everywhere, and it was that beeping sound and little red flashes coming out from amidst the smoke. And somebody said, and again, I don't even know if this is true, would I take it with a grain of salt because I heard it on TV, but somebody said that that's the alarm that's on a firefighter's jacket when if they don't move within 10 seconds or something like that, it goes off. And they were just coming from every direction, these beep, beep, beeping sounds. And of course, the first report I heard was that it was something totally different. I don't even remember what they first said it was. And then I heard it was that, and they kept showing that clip over and over again, and I just kept thinking, I guess maybe that's when it hit me that there were people there. And
well, one of the things that struck a lot of people was the fact that some of the early shots showed people jumping, from the Trade Center, and they only showed maybe a few. But after reading more about it, apparently hundreds of people jumped. And I don't know if this was, brought up when you were in New York, or these were things that they didn't probably want to talk about and deal with. I don't know. Yeah,
I did hear that almost right away. And again, I don't even think to this day, I think this is the first time I've heard that it was hundreds. I didn't know that. I had a friend.
I don't think there's any there's nobody that's quantified how many exactly,
right.
but they had people that were down there that said that they saw a lot of people jumping from the higher floors.
Right. Yeah, that horrifies me. I've seen pictures of, I went into this gallery one time. This person had set up kind of this makeshift gallery of pictures from that day, and it wasn't even necessarily pictures of the Trade Center or of any sort of aftermath. It was just kind of pictures from New York City from that day. But of course, a lot of it was the World Trade Center, and well, I'll go off record with this, but the guy was telling me he was spending a lot of the time photoshopping out things on the ground because he said he just didn't feel that that was proper to show because it was just body parts on the ground. And so I hope that's off the record because I don't want anybody's family to hear anything like that. But you know, there were pictures of people, you know, sort of hanging on to the edge, and I just, like, that's just horrifying, you know, and to have that decision of, you know, where else is there to go, you know, I don't know, it's just awful. But I did have a friend who was down at a building on 4 blocks away from it, and she had gotten up to the 34th floor and had a meeting there, and I hope it's okay to tell a hearsay story. But she said that they were getting ready for the meeting and they saw all these papers flying through the air, and somebody made like a crack, like, oh, somebody just got sick of work this morning or something, and threw their papers out the window. And whether or not they heard or they just looked out the window to see what was going on, because I guess it was kind of around the corner, and they looked out and they saw the building on fire. And my friend said she saw people jumping, and she said that she turned around and said, I'm out of here. And she said that the other people in the conference room were just standing there watching, and she said, are you leaving? Because I'm leaving, you know. And she said she took off her high heels and she ran down 34 flights of stairs and hopped in a cab and said, just drive north as far as you can go. And that was, I think that was before either of the towers collapsed, so it was good that she did that, you know, because she probably would have gotten a bad situation. And my brother was actually supposed to be at that very same company in a meeting the next day, flying here from Washington, and it's obviously canceled.
Yeah, certainly an amazing time. I mean, amazing isn't the right word, but totally.
The whole thing was surreal. I mean, that's really the best word for it, you know. And in some ways, you could just start to get a glimmer of what some people who live in, you know, war-torn areas go through on a daily basis. And I mean, just a glimmer, you know, because I really, you know, when you look back on it, was pretty far away. But the fear was still there that, you know, you didn't know what was coming down next. And because we didn't know what the point was. You know, I didn't know what they wanted from us. I didn't know if was their point to, you know, make this huge statement, or was their point to make a bigger statement by taking the entire city out, which, as far as I could tell, they easily could have done. You know, if they can take the World Trade Centers out with nobody making a move, you know. And again, you know, people standing on the roof going, where's the military? Where's the military? You know, we just felt completely vulnerable to anything coming along.
How about we take a break?
All right. Sounds good. I actually am getting hungry.
And yeah.